The Galactic Tragedy Index was older than most stars. It sat in the great archives of a world so ancient that its sun had died and been replaced twice. The archivists who maintained it were creatures of pure thought, beings who had given up their bodies long ago because flesh was too fragile for the work they did. Their job was simple but terrible. They recorded every tragedy in the known universe. Every war, every plague, every extinction, every moment when a species looked up at the sky and realized it was alone, or worse, that it was about to be. The index gave each tragedy a number. The higher the number, the greater the suffering. A small war between two nations might score a 3. The death of an entire world might score a 90. The archivists had seen it all, and they had recorded it all, and they had felt nothing about any of it for a very long time. 9 was one of the oldest archivists still working. It had watched 412 species die. Some had gone quickly, destroyed by cosmic accidents they never saw coming. Some had gone slowly, eating themselves alive with hatred and fear. Some had begged for help. Some had tried to take others with them. None of them had surprised 9. After so many centuries of watching death, nothing surprised it anymore. Or so it thought. The file on humanity had been ordinary for most of its existence. Humans were a young species from a small blue world in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. They had discovered fire, built cities, invented machines, and eventually reached the stars. They were curious and loud and strangely emotional. They formed attachments to everything, including things that could not love them back, like ships and planets and small furry animals they kept in their homes for no practical reason. The archivists had assigned humanity a monitoring algorithm and paid them little attention. Young species came and went. Most of them destroyed themselves before they became interesting. The algorithm would alert them if anything noteworthy happened. For 300 years, nothing did. Humans spread to other worlds. They met other species. They made friends and enemies and everything in between. They were messy and complicated, but so was everyone else. The galaxy was full of messy, complicated species. Humanity was not special. Then, though, a consensus made its decision, and everything changed. Though we're one of the elder races, species so old and powerful that younger civilizations learned to stay out of their way. There were 12 of them in the consensus, and together they had ruled the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed. They did not rule through kindness. They ruled through careful calculation. They looked at every new species and asked a simple question: will this species help us or hurt us in the long run? For 300 years, they had watched humanity grow. They had watched humans spread to new worlds, build new ships, make new alliances. They had watched humans form deep friendships with species they had only just met. They had watched humans throw themselves into danger to protect strangers. They had watched humans cry at sad stories and laugh at small joys and love each other with a fierceness that made the elder races uncomfortable. They did not understand love. They had evolved past it long ago, deciding it was inefficient. But they understood threat assessment very well, and humanity was starting to look like a threat. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually, if left unchecked, humans would become powerful enough to challenge the consensus. Their population was growing too fast. Their technology was advancing too quickly. Their habit of making friends with everyone they met was building them a network of alliances that could one day rival the elder races themselves. The consensus debated for 11 years. Some argued for patience. Some argued for integration. But in the end, fear won. It always did. They sent a delegation to Earth to deliver their verdict. Humanity had two choices. They could accept permanent confinement to their home system, giving up their colonies and their ships and their dreams of exploration, or they could face systematic removal. The humans who received this message did not react the way the consensus expected. There was no screaming, no threats, no desperate attempts at negotiation. The human ambassador, a woman named, simply listened until the delegation finished speaking. Then she asked for time to consult with her people. The delegation agreed to wait one standard year for humanity's answer. That year was the strangest the galaxy had ever seen. Humans did not spend it building weapons. They did not spend it searching for allies who might fight on their behalf. They did not spend it begging the consensus to reconsider. Instead, they spent it talking to each other. Every human colony held meetings. Every ship, every station, every settlement. People gathered in homes and parks and public squares to discuss what they wanted to do. There were arguments. There were tears. There were long nights of debate that stretched into longer mornings. But slowly, something remarkable began to take shape. Humanity was not going to accept confinement. They had spent their entire existence reaching for the stars. They could not go back to being prisoners on one world. But they were also not going to fight. They had seen what happened to species that went to war with the elder races. Those species became monsters before they became corpses. So humanity chose a third option. They chose to end on their own terms. When Ambassador delivered humanity's answer to the consensus, she did it with a calm that unnerved even the eldest of the elder races. "We will not be confined," she said, "but we will not fight you either. We will use the time we have left to live as we have always lived, with dignity, with purpose, with joy. And when our time is over, we will go quietly, but we will go as ourselves." The consensus did not know what to make of this. They had expected surrender or defiance. They had not expected acceptance. They had not expected a species to look at its own extinction and simply nod, as if death were an old friend they had always known would come. They agreed to give humanity 100 years to prepare. It was more than generous. Most species got far less warning before the end. 9 received the alert on the day of Ambassador's speech. The monitoring algorithm had flagged humanity's file for immediate attention, not because of the tragedy itself, which was sad but not unusual. Species died all the time. The algorithm had flagged it because of something else, something it had never seen before. The archivist accessed the file and began to read. It read Ambassador's speech. It read the transcripts of the meetings that had led to humanity's decision. It read the words that ordinary humans had spoken to each other as they decided how to face the end of everything they knew. 9 had not felt surprise in 6,000 years. It had not felt curiosity in longer than that. But as it read humanity's file, something stirred in its ancient mind. Something that felt almost like wonder. These creatures knew they were going to die. All of them. Every man, woman, and child. Every human who had ever been born or ever would be. They knew the exact century in which their species would cease to exist. And instead of falling apart, instead of tearing each other to pieces in a final frenzy of despair, they had chosen to spend their remaining time being kind to each other. 9 closed the file and opened a new observation protocol. For the first time in 400 extinctions, it decided to watch a species die in real time, not because it had to, because it wanted to understand. What kind of creature looked at the end of everything and smiled? The first decade of humanity's final century was the strangest the galaxy had ever witnessed. Every other species that had faced extinction had followed the same pattern. Denial came first, then anger, then desperate bargaining, then collapse. Civilizations tore themselves apart in their final years. Old hatreds resurfaced. Resources hoarded. Violence erupted. The end of a species was always ugly because dying brought out the worst in everyone. Humanity did not follow the pattern. Humanity did something the archivists had never recorded before. They got busy. Not busy with fighting or fleeing or any of the things the galaxy expected. Busy with living. Within a year of Ambassador's announcement, every human colony had established what they called Sunset Councils. These were groups of ordinary people, elected by their communities, whose job was to answer a single question. If we only have 100 years left, what do we want to do with them? The answers that came back surprised everyone, including the humans themselves. They did not want to spend their final century mourning. They did not want to waste it on regret or anger or fear. They wanted to build things. They wanted to create things. They wanted to leave something behind that would outlast them. 9 watched from the archives as humanity began its work. On Earth, they started construction of the great monument at Olympus Mons. It would take 50 years to complete, a vast structure of metal and stone that would stand for 1,000,000 years after the last human was gone. But it was not a monument to human greatness. It was a monument to gratitude. The inscription at its base read, "We were given the gift of existence in a universe that did not have to include us. We are grateful for every moment. Thank you." Other species did not understand. The consensus sent observers to watch humanity's preparations for extinction, expecting to gather intelligence on human weakness. What they found instead confused them deeply. Humans were not preparing to die. They were preparing to be remembered, and they were doing it with joy. On the colony world of New Singapore, a group of human musicians began composing what they called the Last Symphony. It would be the longest piece of music ever written, taking an entire day to perform from start to finish. Each movement represented a different era of human history, from the first cave paintings to the final sunset. They worked on it for 30 years, refining every note, knowing they would only perform it once. On Mars, a team of architects designed a library that would survive the death of the sun itself. They filled it with copies of every book humanity had ever written, every song they had ever sung, every story they had ever told. The library was not meant for humans. It was meant for whoever came after, a gift from a dead species to a universe that would continue without them. 9 requested permission to observe humanity more closely. The other archivists were confused by this request. Why would anyone want to watch a species die? Death was death. It was always the same, but 9 insisted, and eventually permission was granted. It traveled to Earth in a vessel made of pure thought, invisible to human sensors. It moved among them like a ghost, watching and listening, and trying to understand. What it saw there changed something deep inside its ancient mind. Humans knew they were dying. Every single one of them knew. The children knew. The elderly knew. The newborn infants knew because their parents told them from the moment they could understand words. And yet they kept living. They kept laughing. They kept falling in love and raising families and making plans for futures they would never see. 9 followed a human woman named for 3 years, was a teacher on a small colony world in the outer systems. Every day, she taught children who would never grow old. She taught them mathematics and literature and history. She taught them how to think and how to question and how to dream. She taught them that their lives had meaning, even though those lives would be short. One day, a student asked her why they should bother learning anything if they were all going to die, smiled and knelt down beside the child. Because learning is not about the future, she said. Learning is about right now. Every time you understand something new, you become a little more alive. And being alive, even for a short time, is the most precious gift in the universe. The observers reported this conversation to the consensus. They labeled it as evidence of human delusion. Clearly, though said, humans had simply gone mad with grief. They were pretending everything was fine because they could not handle the truth. 9 disagreed. It had watched 400 species die. It knew what madness looked like. It knew what denial looked like. This was neither. This was something else entirely. This was a species that had looked at death and decided that death was not the most important thing. 40 years into humanity's final century, the galaxy began to take notice. Other species started sending their own observers. They came expecting to study extinction. Instead, they found themselves invited to parties. Humans threw parties constantly. Birthday parties, anniversary parties, parties for no reason at all except that it was a nice day and there was music and someone had made cake. The observers did not know what to do with this. They had protocols for dealing with desperate species and dying species and violent species. They had no protocols for dealing with species that offered them cake. A diplomat named 12 attended a human celebration called a wedding. Two humans were joining their lives together, promising to love each other until death. 12 pointed out, as politely as it could, that death would come for both of them within 50 years. The bride laughed. "Of course it will," she said. "That is why we are doing this now. We do not love each other despite the ending. We love each other because of it. Every moment is precious because every moment could be the last." 12 included this conversation in its official report. The report was filed and forgotten, but 12 never forgot. Something had shifted inside it, something the archivists thought they had evolved past long ago. For the first time 12 felt something like envy. These humans had so little time. They were going to die, all of them, and they knew it. And yet they seemed more alive than any of the immortal elder races. They burned brighter because they knew the flame would not last. They loved harder because they knew love would end. They lived every day as if it mattered because they understood, in a way the elder races had forgotten, that every day did matter. By the 60th year, the galaxy was changing, not because of anything humans did deliberately. They were not trying to teach anyone anything. They were just living their lives, loving their families, creating their art, and facing their end with a grace that shamed the species that had condemned them. But the elder races were watching, and some of them, despite themselves, were learning. The last human was born on a Tuesday in the year of the dying. Her name was Maya, and she came into the world crying like every baby before her, unaware that she carried a weight no child should ever have to bear. She was the last. There would be no more after her. The Sunset Councils had calculated the numbers carefully, ensuring that no child would be left orphaned, that every baby born would have someone to love them until the very end. Maya's mother held her in the delivery room and wept. Not from sadness, though sadness was there. She wept from joy. She wept because her daughter was alive, because that tiny heart was beating, because somewhere in the universe a new consciousness had flickered into existence. That was always worth celebrating, even now, especially now. 9 was there when Maya took her first breath. The archivist had been watching humanity for nearly a century now. It had seen them build their monuments and compose their symphonies and fill their libraries with everything they wanted the future to remember. It had seen them throw their parties and raise their children and love each other with an intensity that burned like a dying star. And now it was seeing the end. The galaxy had changed in those 100 years. The consensus was fracturing. 2 of the elder races had withdrawn from it entirely, unwilling to be part of an organization that had condemned a species to death for the crime of being too alive. Others were debating whether the decision should be reversed, whether humanity should be given a second chance. But it was too late for second chances. The humans had made their choice. They had not asked for mercy or extension. They had not begged for more time. They had simply lived as fully and completely as they could for as long as they could. And now their time was running out. The last generation grew up knowing what they were. They called themselves the Sunset Children, and they wore the name with pride. They were not bitter about their fate. How could they be? Their parents had taught them that life was a gift, not a right. Their grandparents had taught them that endings were not tragedies if you filled the middle with meaning. Their great-grandparents had taught them that the measure of a life was not its length but its depth. Maya learned to walk on a world that would outlive her. She learned to talk in a language that would soon fall silent. She learned to read from books that would never be opened again. And she learned to love from a family that knew exactly how precious every moment was. By the time Maya was 20, there were fewer than 1,000,000 humans left. By 30, fewer than 100,000. By 40, barely 10,000. They gathered on Earth for the end, returning to the world where everything had started. The monuments were complete. The libraries were full. The last symphony had been performed 3 times to audiences of billions from 100 different species. Everything that needed to be done had been done. The elder races came to watch, not to gloat, not anymore. They came because something was happening on that small blue world that the galaxy had never seen before. A species was dying with grace. A species was dying with dignity. A species was dying in a way that made every observer question what they thought they knew about death. The consensus officially dissolved on the day Maya turned 50. The 12 elder races that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000,000 years looked at what they had done and could not bear the sight. They had destroyed countless species before. They had never regretted any of them. But humanity was different. Humanity had made them see themselves, and they did not like what they saw. New alliances formed in the vacuum left by the consensus. Younger species stepped forward, species that had learned from humanity's example. They did not seek power. They did not seek control. They sought something that the elder races had forgotten existed. They sought connection. Maya was 70 when she became the last human alive. She was not afraid. She had never been afraid. Her mother had taught her that fear was just excitement without breath. Her father had taught her that death was just a door, and no one knew what was on the other side. Her grandmother, who had lived through the first days of the dying, had taught her that every ending was also a beginning. 9 came to her on that final day. It made itself visible for the first time, a being of pure thought taking on a form that human eyes could see. Maya was sitting in a garden on Earth, the same garden where her great-great-grandmother had planted the first seed of the gratitude grove a century before. The trees were tall now, and their leaves whispered in the wind. "You are the last," 9 said. Maya smiled. "I know." "Are you afraid?" "No," she shook her head. "I have had a good life. I have loved and been loved. I have seen things that took my breath away and felt things that made me want to cry from happiness. I am not afraid of the ending. I am grateful for the story." 9 sat beside her. All around them, beings from 1,000 worlds had gathered to witness the end of humanity. They had come from across the galaxy, species that had never met a human, species that had learned of them only through stories. They came because they wanted to see. They wanted to understand. They wanted to know what it looked like when a species faced extinction with its eyes open and its heart at peace. The sun was setting over the garden. Maya watched it, her ancient eyes still bright, still curious, still finding wonder in the world. She had her mother's smile and her father's stubborn chin and her grandmother's gentle hands. She was the sum of everyone who had come before her, the last note of a symphony that had been playing for 300,000 years. "You taught us something," 9 said. Its voice was softer than it had ever been, something we had forgotten, something we did not know we had lost. Maya reached out and took its hand. The gesture was so human, so simple, so full of meaning. "What did we teach you?" "That life is not about avoiding death. It is about living fully until death comes. You showed us that endings do not diminish what came before. They give it meaning. You showed us that a species can be great not because of how long it survives, but because of how it spends the time it has." Maya's eyes were closing now. The sun was almost gone. Around her, beings who had lived for millions of years wept for the first time since they had evolved past weeping. They wept not because humanity was dying, but because humanity had taught them how to feel again. The last words Maya spoke were not profound. They were not a final lesson or a great truth. They were the simplest words in any language, the first words every human child learned to say. "Thank you." And then she was gone, and humanity was gone with her, and the garden was silent except for the whisper of the wind in the trees. 9 sat in that silence for a long time. Around it, the observers from 1,000 worlds began to leave, each of them carrying something with them that they had not brought. The galaxy would be different now, not because humanity had conquered it or changed it by force, because humanity had shown it something it had forgotten. The Galactic Tragedy Index received its final update on humanity that night. 9 wrote it personally, the first time in its existence it had added commentary to an entry. The words were simple, as humanity had been simple, but they would echo across the galaxy for as long as there were beings to hear them. Humanity demonstrated that the value of a life is not measured in years but in moments, They showed us that death is not a failure but a frame that gives meaning to the picture. They taught us that courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to love anyway. They died as they lived, with their eyes open, their hearts full, and their hands reaching out to hold ours. We have recorded 11,000 years of tragedy. We never thought to record grace. Humanity taught us that we were asking the wrong question. The question was never how do we avoid dying. The question was always how do we make dying worthwhile. They answered that question, and in answering it they changed us all. The entry was filed, the archives were updated, and across the galaxy, in 1,000 languages on 1,000 worlds, beings who had never met a human began to live differently. They held their loved ones closer. They noticed sunsets. They said thank you more often. They stopped being afraid of endings and started being grateful for middles. Humanity was gone, but what they had taught the universe would never die. And in that way, in the only way that mattered, they had achieved the one thing every species dreams of. They had become immortal.